What do you do when life hits so hard it knocks the air out of your soul? When everything breaks and you're left alone in the dark with nothing but silence? This is the story of what happens after the breaking point, and why that moment, the one that nearly destroys you, might be the exact moment you discover who you truly are. Stay with me, because by the end of this, you will never look at pain the same way again. When things get hard, it was the kind of cold that stings the skin. The wind howled through the broken alley, like a warning. Faint streetlights flickered, casting shadows that danced like ghosts. He stood alone, hands trembling, breath turning to mist in the air. His legs ached from running. His chest burned from fear. The world around him felt like it was closing in. Every sound was sharper, every heartbeat louder. Trash crunched beneath his worn-out shoes. A dog barked somewhere in the distance. But all he could hear was the voice in his head, telling him to give up, to stop, to fall. Pain pulsed through his ribs. The wound on his arm throbbed with each movement. He looked down and saw blood soaking through his shirt. Not a lot, but enough to remind him how real this was. He had trusted the wrong person, believed the wrong promise. And now here he was, alone, cornered, cold. He could barely think. The fear felt heavy, like a weight on his chest. He leaned against the wall, breathing hard. The bricks were wet, moss-covered, smelled of mold and old rain. His eyes searched the darkness. No one was coming. No help. No rescue. But then, a memory flickered. His mother's voice, calm and firm. Do not stop just because it hurts. Pain does not mean you are finished. It means you are alive. He clenched his jaw, straightened his back, ignored the sting of his wound, the cold, the fear. He started walking, one step, then another, even though his body screamed, even though the night felt like it wanted to swallow him. Because sometimes the only way out is through the pain, through the silence, through the part where everything inside you wants to break. And when things get hard, truly hard, you do not wait for the light. You become it. You fight not because you feel brave. You fight because you have no other choice. Because quitting leaves a scar deeper than failure. Because your story deserves more than a silent ending. There, in the dead of night, he chose to rise. Not because the path was clear, but because his heart still beat. And that beat, that was enough to begin again. That beat was enough to begin again. Each step forward echoed louder than the one before. The alley no longer felt like a trap, but a tunnel. A narrow space leading somewhere, anywhere, just not here. His body still ached, but now it moved with purpose. Each movement was a defiance, a rebellion against everything that tried to break him. The blood on his shirt reminded him of the betrayal. The pain in his side reminded him of the cost. But the fire in his eyes reminded him why he had not given up. The city around him was still sleeping. Its heart beat slow and distant. Cars passed like ghosts on the far side of the street. Neon lights blinked through foggy windows, painting the wet pavement in reds and blues. He walked with a limp, but he walked. Past shuttered shops and cracked sidewalks. Past reminders of who he was and what he had lost. A broken payphone dangled by a cord, useless. A child's toy lay forgotten near a storm drain. Memories whispered from the corners of silence. This was not the life he had planned, not the dream he had once chased so blindly. But this was the truth. Raw, ugly, undeniable. And still he moved. Not with confidence, not with pride, but with courage. The kind that lives in the quiet. The kind that grows when no one is watching. The kind born from failure, carved by pain, and carried by grit. He thought about the ones who walked away, the ones who laughed when he fell, the ones who never believed in him. And then he thought about the ones who did, the ones who stood by him when he was nothing, the ones who saw the fight in him, even when he did not. That thought hit harder than the pain. It was not about proving anyone wrong anymore. It was about proving himself right, that he was still here, that he still mattered. The rain began to fall, light at first, cool drops tapping against his skin, washing away the blood, the sweat, the past. It felt like a second chance, like the sky was telling him to let go, to leave behind the version of himself that was too afraid to fight. the version that begged for the easy way out, that waited for a miracle instead of becoming one. So he walked on, through puddles that soaked his shoes, through streets that once mocked him with silence. He passed a mirror in a storefront window, stopped, looked. What he saw was not broken. It was not weak. It was human, weathered but unshaken, wounded but alive, frightened but still moving forward. He kept going, through the part of town where everything was forgotten, where pain lived in boarded windows and broken dreams. But he walked through it, and with every step, something inside him shifted. The boy who once doubted himself gone. The man who rose from the ashes, emerging, not all at once, but piece by piece. He thought about how close he had come to giving up, how easy it would have been to just stay on the ground, to surrender to the weight pressing down on his soul. But then he remembered, diamonds do not come from comfort. Strength is not born in sunshine. It is forged in storms, in tears, in silence. In nights like this, he passed under a flickering street lamp. It buzzed above him, spitting out light like it was struggling to stay alive. And he understood it. It was broken, damaged, but still shining. And so was he. He clenched his fists, not in anger, in determination, in resolve. He would not go back, not to the lies, not to the fear, not to the version of himself that waited for life to change instead of changing it. Because now he knew, when things get hard, you do not curl into yourself. You do not beg for mercy. You do not hide. You roar. Even if your voice is broken, even if no one hears it, you roar. Because that is how the darkness knows you are still alive. He remembered every time he was told he was not enough. Every time he was made to feel small. Every time he was overlooked, dismissed, rejected. And he used it. Turned the pain into power. The heartbreak into fuel. The silence into music only he could hear. He reached the end of the street. Looked up. The rain had stopped. The clouds had parted just enough to reveal a slice of moon. Not full. Not bright. But there. Just like him. He took a deep breath. Felt the cold air rush into his lungs. Felt his heart pounding like a war drum in his chest. And he smiled. Not because it was over, but because he had made it this far. Because he was still standing. Still breathing. Still fighting. And that was victory. Not the kind with trophies or cheers. The kind that happens in the shadows, where no one sees, where the world is quiet, and the only applause is your own heartbeat. That kind of victory changes a person. Not instantly, but permanently. It makes you fierce. It makes you real. It makes you ready. Ready to face the next fall, the next storm, the next fight. Because when things get hard, that is when you discover who you truly are. Not in comfort, not in safety, but in chaos, in failure, in pain. That is where strength is born. That is where heroes rise. That is where you learn to bend without breaking, to fall without fading, to hurt without giving up. He looked ahead. The road stretched far, still dark, still uncertain. But now he was not afraid of the dark. He had walked through it, lived in it, risen from it. And now he would walk on. And now he would walk on. Not because the pain had vanished, not because the wounds had healed, but because something inside him had changed. The part of him that once craved escape now burned for endurance, for meaning, for the fire that only the broken truly know. He no longer searched for a finish line. He was not chasing a trophy, or applause, or a spotlight. He was chasing something deeper, a version of himself that refused to vanish when life got cruel. The one who survived the nights full of doubt. The one who stood tall when everything around him collapsed. The city still stretched endlessly in front of him, but his steps felt different now. He was not dragging his feet. He was claiming ground. Every step forward was a statement. I am still here. I am not done. The sky remained heavy, but he no longer looked up for signs. He had stopped waiting for rescue. He had learned to rescue himself. The walls around him were still cracked, the light still dim, but his spirit had caught flame. And once it starts burning, there's no storm strong enough to put it out. He passed a man slumped in a doorway, eyes hollow, face rough with time and hunger. They made eye contact. Just for a second. The man nodded, not in greeting, but in recognition, as if to say, I see it in you too. The fire, the ache, the strength to keep walking when everything screams stop. And that was it. No words exchanged. No handshakes. Just that silent agreement between two souls who had been through the same storm. He kept going. The weight of his past clung to him like soaked clothes. But he carried it differently now. He did not drag it. He wore it like armor. Because scars are not shame. They are signs. Proof that he had lived. Fought. Fallen. And stood up again. He thought about the quiet mornings he used to hate. The ones where nothing moved. Where the air felt too heavy to breathe. Now he saw those mornings differently. They were not empty. They were preparing him. Sharpening him. Teaching him that silence can be power. If you learn to listen. A siren echoed in the distance. A reminder that the world was still chaotic. Still burning in places he could not see. But he did not flinch. Not anymore. Because now he understood something most people never would. Peace is not the absence of pain. It is the presence of purpose. Strong enough to stand beside the pain. He turned a corner. The lights of a diner flickered in the distance. Warm. Inviting. Not because of the food, but because of what it symbolized. Rest. Not retreat. Not surrender. Just a pause. He walked through the door. Bell chimed above his head. The smell of coffee, old grease, and wet coats filled the air. It was not glamorous, but it was real. He sat at the counter. A waitress gave him a glance. Tired but kind. Poured coffee without asking. The warmth of the cup seeped into his hands. The steam fogged his vision, softened the edges of a hard day. And for the first time in a long while, he let out a breath he had been holding for years. Not because everything was fixed, but because he had finally realized. He did not need things to be perfect. He just needed to keep going. He sipped the coffee. Bitter. Strong. Exactly what he needed. He looked around. Others sat at tables. Some laughing. Some silent. Some lost in thought. And he realized. Everyone was fighting something. You could not always see it, but it was there. In the slouched shoulders. The distant eyes. The quiet fidgeting of fingers. But they were still here. Just like him. Still showing up. Still pushing forward. He reached into his pocket. Pulled out a small notebook. Its corners bent. Its cover scratched. He flipped through pages filled with thoughts. He had once been too afraid to speak aloud. Dreams. Fears. Failures. Lessons. And in the final blank page, he wrote just one line. I am not done. He closed the book. Set it beside his cup. Looked up at his reflection in the stainless steel surface of the napkin dispenser. He saw someone different. Not someone who had all the answers. Not someone who had conquered the world. But someone who had chosen to stay in the fight. And that choice was everything. Because when things get hard, and they will, it is not the size of your steps that matter. It is the fact that you take them. Not because you are unafraid, but because you are willing. Willing to keep walking through pain. Through darkness. Through doubt. Because deep down, you know something others forget. The hardest roads often lead to the strongest destinations. Not the ones made of gold, but the ones made of grit, of truth, of unshakable courage. He left money on the counter, nodded to the waitress, and walked back out into the cold. Same street, same storm, but not the same man. Because now, he was not walking to escape the hard things. He was walking to conquer them. Step by step, breath by breath, one moment at a time. And even if the world turned its back again, he would not stop. Because when things get hard, you do not break. You rise. Because when things get hard, you do not break. You rise. And rising does not always look heroic. Sometimes it looks like silence in the face of chaos. Sometimes it looks like dragging yourself out of bed when everything inside screams for sleep. Sometimes it is holding back tears while forcing a smile. Sometimes it is simply breathing, just breathing, when the world feels too loud, too heavy, too cruel. He knew that now. He knew rising was not some grand explosion. It was a flicker, a pulse, the decision to keep going, even when it hurts. Especially when it hurts. The streets were quieter now. The storm had moved on, leaving behind a trail of puddles and stillness. But within him, something rumbled. Not fear, not doubt, something deeper. Resolve. He walked without knowing exactly where to go. But that was not the point anymore. It was not about the destination. It was about the motion. Forward. Always forward. The city around him was waking up slowly. Early lights blinked in the windows of apartment buildings. Shadows moved behind curtains. Trucks rumbled down distant roads. And the sky began to shift, from pitch black to a deep steel blue. A color caught between night and dawn. He stopped at a crosswalk, watched a single leaf swirl in the wind. It danced like it did not care that it was alone, that it was small. It moved because it could, because the wind pushed and it refused to stay still. He smiled, the smallest gesture, but the most honest one he had given the world in a long time, because suddenly he felt it. Not relief, not joy, but something real, something powerful. Freedom. Not the kind you find in open fields or quiet mountaintops, but the kind you find in your chest, when you realize no one can take away your will to rise. No one can stop the fire you choose to carry. Not circumstances, not failure, not fear. He remembered the look in their eyes, the ones who doubted him, who told him he was dreaming too big, that he was not cut out for this life, that he would break the moment things got hard. But here he was, still standing, still breathing, still fighting, and not just for success, not just for survival, but for meaning, for truth, for that deeper part of him that never wanted easy, just real. He walked past a mural on the side of a building. It showed a man with wings of fire rising from the rubble, one hand stretched upward, the other gripping chains that were breaking apart. He stared at it, and for a moment, he saw himself, not as he was, but as he could be, as he was becoming. The chains were not gone, but they were cracking, and with each step he took, they loosened a little more. He crossed the street, felt the cold morning air in his lungs, sharp but fresh, bracing but alive. A boy passed him on a skateboard, laughing as he weaved between puddles. That sound, so simple, so careless, so full of life, reminded him of who he used to be, before the world told him to grow up, to be quiet, to stay safe. He did not want safe anymore. He wanted real. He wanted to feel every breath, every failure, every rise. He reached into his coat pocket, touched the notebook again, felt the weight of those pages, the weight of his journey, each word inside a piece of his soul, written in nights of fear, days of doubt, moments of wild hope. He knew now that all of it mattered. Every fall, every scar, every second he almost gave up but did not. Those were the parts that shaped him, not the easy days, not the victories, but the moments no one saw, when it was just him, and the choice to keep going. He walked along a row of shops just beginning to open, a florist setting out buckets of tulips and roses, a baker unlocking the door, warm scent of rising dough escaping into the air. It smelled like comfort, like childhood, like home. But he did not stop, not because he did not want to, but because he had something to do. He had a life to rebuild, a purpose to fulfill, a story to finish writing. And it would not be easy. There would be more dark nights, more hard days, more moments when quitting seemed reasonable. But now, he had tasted something too precious to forget, the power of not giving up, the strength of choosing to rise when it hurts, the quiet fire that grows inside a soul that has been through hell and keeps moving anyway. He did not need permission anymore, not from the world, not from the past, not even from his own fear, because something in him had snapped into place. That final shift, the one that changes survival into momentum, pain into direction, fear into fuel. He walked faster now, each step echoing with quiet certainty. He was not a victim of life. He was a builder, a fighter, a storm that had learned to dance in the rain. And when things got hard again, and they would, he would remember this moment, not the ease of it, but the decision, the fire, the truth that carried him through. That when things get hard, you do not run, you do not break, you do not fold. You rise. You walk. And most of all, you refuse to stop. He kept walking, not to escape something behind him, but to move towards something greater ahead. The air began to shift. The chill no longer cut as deep. A hint of gold touched the edge of the skyline. The first whisper of morning. And with it came clarity. Not the kind that shouts, but the kind that settles. Quiet and sure. Like a steady hand on the shoulder. He felt it in his bones. That this moment, this day, this journey, was his to claim. He no longer needed answers. He no longer needed permission. He had traded those things for conviction, for a deep, soul-bound certainty that he was meant to endure, that he was built for the fire, because those who have walked through the dark see differently. They do not flinch at shadows. They do not fear silence. They find light where others see only night. He had become one of those people, not by choice, but by necessity, by surviving, by showing up, again and again, even when the world pushed him down. He paused at a bridge, where the water moved slow and silver below. A thin mist rose from the surface, softening the city's jagged edges. He stood there for a moment, hands gripping the cold metal railing, eyes locked on the stillness. And in that quiet, he heard something, not with his ears, but with his heart, a rhythm, a pulse, a whisper from the deepest part of himself. I am still here. He closed his eyes. Let the moment fill him. Let the weight of survival become strength. He had cried alone. He had failed in silence. He had doubted everything he believed in. And yet, he was still standing. There was a power in that, a kind of sacred truth. Only the broken ever truly understand. The ones who have shattered and chosen to gather their pieces, one trembling hand at a time. The ones who know that courage is not loud. It is quiet. It is unseen. But it is fierce. He thought of all the nights he had spent curled beneath the weight of his own thoughts. The endless questions, the paralyzing fears, the ache in his chest that never seemed to lift. He had learned to live with it, not because it vanished, but because he changed. He became stronger, not despite the pain, but because of it. And now, he could feel the shift. Like something inside him had clicked, like the road beneath him had finally recognized his steps. He began to walk again, across the bridge, past old warehouses painted with faded graffiti, toward a part of the city he had never dared to explore before. The unknown did not scare him now. He welcomed it. He knew now that discomfort was a teacher, fear a compass, and pain a forge. He remembered the faces of those who gave up, the ones who stopped showing up, the ones who let the world convince them that they were not enough. And then he thought of himself, still walking, still breathing, still burning, not because he was fearless, but because he had chosen to stop waiting for someone else to save him. He was the rescue. He passed a woman sitting on the steps of a closed shop, blanket around her shoulders, eyes staring at nothing. He nodded. She looked up. They locked eyes. And in that split second, there was an understanding. He saw her. She saw him. Two souls weathered by the storm. Two hearts that had learned the same truth. That rising is not a single act, but 1,000 silent choices. He kept going. The sun was beginning to crack through the buildings, casting long golden streaks on the sidewalks. And in that light, he felt no need to hide. Not from his pain, not from his past, not from who he had become. Because strength, he now knew, is not about how loudly you roar. It is about how often you whisper, I will not quit. When no one else can hear you. He reached a park, empty except for the rustle of leaves, and a lone jogger stretching beneath an oak tree. He sat on a bench, took a breath, felt the weight of the moment settle into his bones. And for the first time in a long time, he did not feel lost. He felt rooted. Right here. Right now. He pulled out his notebook again, turned to a fresh page, and began to write. Not a plan, not a goal, not a dream, but a promise. A quiet, unshakable promise to himself that no matter what came, he would keep moving, keep standing, keep rising, because the fire inside him was real, and it would not go out. Not now. Not ever. He closed the notebook, tucked it back in his pocket, and stood. One more breath, one more step, and then another, because when things get hard, when the road twists and the light fades, you do not need perfection. You need movement. You need to keep going. You need to refuse to stop. You need to rise. And that is exactly what he did. One step at a time. Into the light. Into the unknown. Into the fire. He stepped off the path and into the quiet hum of the city awakening around him. The sounds were soft. A bird chirping from a telephone wire. The low rumble of a distant train. The rhythmic sweep of a street cleaner brushing yesterday away. He noticed things he had not seen before. The cracks in the pavement now looked like veins. Signs of life. Of age. Of something still standing. Still holding on. He saw a woman balancing a tray of coffee cups. Her coat too thin for the morning chill. But her posture straight. Her stride steady. And he thought, maybe she had her battles, too. Maybe everyone did. He passed a bike chained to a stop sign. The seat torn. One pedal missing. Still there. Still waiting for someone to ride again. And he realized something vital. Strength is not about never breaking. It is about not disappearing when you do. It is about holding your shape, even after the world has bent you. He crossed the street. The crosswalk light blinked orange. But he moved anyway. Not recklessly. Deliberately. Like someone who no longer needed permission. The coffee shop on the corner smelled of cinnamon and old jazz records. The window was fogged from the inside. He paused, his reflection barely visible in the glass. A shadow of who he was. A flicker of who he could become. He pushed the door open. Warmth wrapped around him instantly. Not just from the heaters, but from the life inside. Chatter. Steam. The scratch of a pen across a napkin. A man behind the counter wore a name tag that read James. James smiled. Not a customer service smile. A real one. Like he saw something in him that mattered. What'll it be? James asked. Voice casual. Like they were old friends. He blinked. Looked at the menu without seeing it. Then said, something strong. James nodded like he understood the request completely. Because sometimes that is all you can say. You do not ask for flavors. You ask for strength. For warmth. For something to hold in your hands. While the world tries to pull you apart. He sat near the window. Watched as the sun edged higher in the sky. Casting long streaks of amber over the tops of cars and rooftops. And with that light, he saw the world differently. Not softer, but clearer. Pain still existed. Struggle still waited in the wings. But now, there was space beside them. Room for hope. Room for quiet joy. The coffee arrived. Dark. Bitter. Exactly what he needed. He took a sip. Felt the warmth spread down his throat and into his chest. It did not solve anything. But it reminded him. He was alive. He was here. And that meant something. He took out his notebook again. The cover now stained slightly from rain and time. It felt like a part of him now. A map of the roads inside his mind. He flipped to a fresh page. This time, he wrote more than a promise. He wrote a truth. There will be more storms. There will be more nights where the weight of everything feels like too much. But I have already made it through what was supposed to break me. I do not fear the dark anymore, because I have learned to build light inside myself. He stared at the words, letting them settle. They were not poetry. They were not profound. But they were real, and that made them powerful. Outside the window, the world continued moving. People walked with purpose. Cars honked. Children skipped past in bright backpacks and messy hair. Life was messy, unpredictable, unfair, but it was also beautiful, because inside all the chaos were people like him, learning to stand in the wreckage and still find the will to move forward. He placed the notebook back in his coat, drained the last of his coffee, and stood. His legs felt stronger now, not because the road ahead had changed, but because he had. He nodded to James at the counter, who nodded back. No words, just recognition, like they both knew that survival deserves its own kind of applause. The door swung open. Cold air met his face, but he did not flinch. He welcomed it, because now he understood something many spend a lifetime searching for. You do not wait for life to get easier. You get stronger. You build endurance. You adapt. You face the hard things. And say, I am not afraid of you anymore. He stepped back onto the sidewalk, blended into the world again, but something inside him stood taller, firmer, wiser. He did not need loud victories. He did not need perfect days. He just needed his fire, and his steps, and his will. And when things got hard again, when the winds returned, and the nights stretched long and cruel, he would remember this morning, this silence, this strength. He would rise again, not because he had to, but because he chose to. And there's nothing more powerful in this world than a soul that chooses to rise, even when it hurts, especially when it hurts. He walked on, into the city, into the day, into his story, step by step, fire in his chest, purpose in his bones, unbreakable, unstoppable, alive. He walked until the sun was fully awake, until the streets no longer felt cold, and the silence inside him had turned into strength. He stopped at the edge of a park, watched the trees sway gently in the wind, branches scarred from seasons past, yet still standing tall, still reaching toward the sky. And in that moment, he realized it was never about avoiding the hard times. It was about becoming someone who could face them. Every failure had shaped him. Every setback had sharpened him. Every tear had carved out space for wisdom, for courage, for peace. He was no longer the same person who once crumbled in silence. Now he stood with quiet power, not because life had become easier, but because he had grown stronger. He looked out over the city, 1,000 stories unfolding all at once, each person fighting their own invisible battle. And he whispered, not to the world, but to himself, I made it through. Not untouched, not unscarred, but undefeated. So when things get hard again, as they always do, he will not fear the storm. He will become the storm, because inside him now lies a truth deeper than doubt, louder than fear, stronger than pain. He is not here to surrender. He is here to rise. And so are you.